Alongside our main episodes of Oxford Plus, for Season 4, we're introducing a short fortnightly mini-series in between the main episodes, brought to you by me, Susannah de Jager, and in partnership with Mishcon de Rea. In each episode, we ask our guests the same 4 questions, designed to reveal how they think, what shapes their decisions, and what they're curious about right now. The questions stay the same, the answers rarely do. This is Oxford Plus in brief. So, Alison, we're doing kind of mini episodes as well, and I'm going to ask you a few questions.
Okay.
So what would success look like if we got this right for you? How do we iterate from this point?
I think what success looks like is, I think, defense getting out of its own way and stop over-intellectualizing defense reform. It's a really basic, simple relationship between industry and the government. The government needs to buy things and industry needs to deliver those things. And I think we lose sight of how simple and transactional it really should be, and we make it more complicated. So I think if we get this right, we think about how we write requirements differently that recognizes the jurisdictions of knowledge that truly exist. So the military are the experts in the problem, not industry, and industry are experts in the solution. And they work together in that collaboration. And I think if we got that right and wrote requirements based on that and understood how we can procure and empowered our acquisition workforce, I think we would be in the right direction of getting it right.
What advice would you give somebody entering the defense sector tomorrow?
Understand the problem you're solving more than anything, and understand if anyone cares about it. And a really good heuristic is desirability, feasibility, viability. Desirability, does anyone care about the problem you're solving? And would they use a solution? Feasibility, can it technically be done within the solution space? And viability, does the organization care enough about this problem to be willing to put money against it and solve the problem?
In your opinion, what does the UK defence sector look like in 2050? How will the landscape have changed?
24 years from now.
It's a long way off.
I think that, and I'm being inspired by one of my clients who I think is really, truly innovative and changing the way that we think about defense. I don't think we are going to have the primes in the same way that we have them. I think we are going to have a different marketplace for defense, and that marketplace is going to be organized very differently.
How do you see this playing out between the larger players in the space, the medium size and the smaller?
I think what I see with this kind of new cohort is they don't want to be acquired. So they're not looking for fast exits. They are mission driven. They are looking for impact. And they are looking to play a role in what seems to be a conflict that resonates with them, quite understandably, more than Iraq and Afghanistan. And so as we see Russian encroachment on eastern borders and what's happened in Ukraine, the companies feel legitimately they have a role to play. And so they're not coming into it with the MOD owning the data as part of their strategy. They really believe and they're committed to defense being a better entity and it having a better competitive advantage. And I think the primes, as we understand them, so that would be the Northrop Grumman, Lockheed Martin, Boeing, Thales, I don't think they're the bad guy. And I know they get thrown under the bus a lot. But they do maintain a lot of our critical infrastructure through supply chains. We cannot scale without them. And so what I also see is companies who either understand that to scale, they need to partner with primes, which I think is partially true. But there are some companies right now that have a mindset that they will not ever work with primes. And in fact, they're going to change the entire paradigm of defense. That's really interesting. To answer your question, I don't know, but they're displaying different behaviors than they have been in the last 10 years.
I'd love to hear more about the educational side of what you have been focused on in the past 5-6 years, because you spoke earlier, you come from an academic background yourself, but you've launched this amazing educational charity called the Common Mission Project. Tell us a bit more about it.
Yeah. So the Common Mission Project was started out of the program called Hacking for Defense. And that was run as a very kind of scrappy pilot summer course at Stanford in 2015. And then in 2016, it became a more formal course offering at Stanford. And at that point, we understood that this course had legs and that we could spread it to every university in the US. And I'll explain the course in just a minute. But we built that charity around that original concept of Hacking for Defense. As you say, Common Mission Project is an educational charity. We run the programs called Hacking For. So our big programs are Hacking for Defense in the US, Hacking for Ministry of Defense here. But we've also proven the application of the methodology and the curriculum to hacking for sustainability, hacking for oceans, hacking for diplomacy, hacking for local. And it really has nothing to do with coding or like hacking into systems. It's more like the life hack, because I do get that question quite a lot. How do you solve a problem?
Good clarification.
Yeah, how do you solve a problem faster? And the premise of the program is really simple, but really powerful. Give students real, unsolved national security and defense problems and teach them how to validate the problem and build first versions of the solution in 10 weeks. So it's a flipped course model. These students have to interview 10 people a week over 10 weeks. They often interview more than 100 people in 10 weeks, and they give weekly presentations. And the role of the instructors is to provide critical feedback and to develop the student skills of how do they quickly defend a hypothesis? How do they justify their position? How do they use evidence that they've learned in order to validate some of their assumptions? But traditional education in this space is so theory heavy. I know it. I've taught it at King's College London, Department of War Studies. I've taught our military officers at our Defense Academy. I've taught at Georgetown University. Students learn about defense policy and military history without ever meeting someone in uniform. So we flip that. We pair these students with problem sponsors from the MOD and NATO, and they conduct this customer discovery. This is the concept that Steve Blank, the godfather of lean startup, developed and the co-founder of our program. So they can go out and deeply understand the problem before proposing a solution. The concept itself was really the brainchild between Pete Newell, my business partner, former colonel in the U.S. Army, and Steve Blank. And it was, how do you take the best practices of what Steve developed in Lean Startup and Lean Launchpad, and then put them to the operational problems that Pete was trying to solve on the battlefield and the lessons that he had from the Rapid Equipping Force? And so the hypothesis was, we've been banging our heads for 10 years inside government trying to solve a problem. We're not making progress. Why don't we give it to our nation's brightest, our most talented, our most ambitious students and see if they can have a crack at it? And if by doing that, we can get them interested in defense or the government writ large. And what makes this really powerful is it's this hands-on education in the kind of very messy reality of how government works, which we've talked about a little bit. And these student teams quickly learn problems that are not as initially described by their sponsor, that procurement constraints matter as much as technology, and that success requires understanding both the operational environment and the institutional context. But the students that come into it, I am so passionate about this because we have got to get this generation to care about defense and national security. It is critical, a critical imperative. If they don't care about it, then what we are saying is, Russia, come to our borders. Yeah. Russia, take Ukraine. In fact, why don't you take the Baltics and the Nordics and go into Poland? Everything that we stand for and our values that we hold really dear and those big problems that we're trying to solve, they relate to defense and national security. And if we can't get this generation to care about it, then I think that is a huge handicap for us. And so this program is so powerful. 86% of the students who take our class indicate that as a result of taking the class, they want to work either in the MOD, join one of the single services, or work in the defense industrial base.
Can I ask what the starting number is?
Around 30%.
Oh, wow. So it's a huge jump. Because you might think it was a sort of self-selecting cohort to a degree.
So that's really interesting. And also, we're not statisticians, but the 30% is what is their awareness of defense. Okay. And then at the end, we ask, what are your employment preferences? And so we're making some relationships from the data there. But I think what's really interesting in having scaled this program, so it's over 60 universities in the US and it's to 27 here in the UK.
Which is just amazing. That's huge.
It's incredible. And it is so rewarding. When I went to university, I just felt like I kind of barely made it out of bed. I would study a little bit, maybe go to a party. These students are coming in and they're so focused. And once they get excited about a problem, you can see that spark in their eye of, oh my gosh, I want to keep working on this. And so I think what we've discovered is there's such an enormous latent talent in mission-driven work. If you give students the opportunity to work on problems that matter, they choose it. So all of our classes are electives. All of these Hacking for MOD classes, they're all electives, which means the students can choose what they take. And they choose national security and defense. So that tells you something about this next generation.
It's very interesting hearing you talk about making them care, because I think this generation really do seem to care. I feel like when we were growing up, we weren't having as much geopolitical unrest and conflict. It felt quite abstract, and it felt like a bit of a waste of money compared to the NHS potentially. It didn't feel as existential as it did for our grandparents, our parents. And now it's shifted so much. And as you touched upon, everything that we hold dear is predicated upon defending our borders. And that has come back to the fore. I think that somewhere between getting them to care and just making them aware, but I think even more importantly, what you're doing is making them feel like they have a part to play and some agency in that going forward, because it is complicated. It is quite abstract. And there are still quite a lot of potentially negative connotations that sit there for some people.
This is the most important work that we do. So I'm really glad that you raised this. What I see, because I'm in the classrooms every term, is there's a generational shift happening. And I'm exposed, very privileged, exposed to some of the best universities in the world, and especially those educated in progressive environments. Defense is associated with forever wars. It is associated with the military-industrial complex conspiracies. It is associated with imperial overreach. But when you ask these same students about defending democracy, protecting civilians from authoritarian regimes, or ensuring open societies defend themselves, they care deeply. And it's exactly as you said. The disconnect between the abstract concept of defense and the concrete reality of what it actually protects, that is the missing link that this program provides. And so we reframe the conversation through this program. We talk about missions, not militaries. We focus on problems like critical infrastructure, decreasing accidental deaths, increasing safety, defending against cyber attacks, climate change, and sustainability. All of those problems students recognize as legitimate because they are. And we connect them with people in uniform who are thoughtful, who are principled, and who are mission-driven. And so I think that there is a huge shift in perspective where we have watched, as I said, students come in skeptical and saying they want to join the MOD, or they didn't realize that the work that defense was doing was about protecting the things that they care about. And once you meet the intelligence analyst trying to stop terrorist financing, or the submariner who's worried about detecting threats on a nuclear submarine, it stops becoming abstract. And it becomes about people trying to do important work with insufficient tools. And that is something this generation is desperate to do.
Well, it stops becoming faceless. And I think you'll be familiar with this, but I remember reading something that basically members of the military in uniform in the US were treated with quite a high level of deference. And that here in the UK, actually, it was often the complete opposite and very negative from the public.
I've experienced it. I grew up in the U.S. My father was drafted into Vietnam. My brother was a Navy SEAL. I'm married to a British Army officer. I've always grown up with a deep appreciation for the armed forces and an understanding of kind of where they sit in society and the kind of that defense and national security, that kind of wider narrative woven through the educational system. They defend that freedom that we all really enjoy. And that's a very different narrative here. And even if my husband has to go to a meeting and he's wearing his uniform and he's in London, I'll say, oh gosh, please be careful, please be careful.
Wow.
I never would have said that in the US. So I think that we don't have the same relationship with the armed forces that we do in the US. I think that from some of the younger generation, to the point we were just talking about, I think they equate defense with things like actively killing people or doing really bad things, or there's kind of this conspiracy around defense and what it does. But if you had the opportunity to look in defense and see the people that are working there, not only are they not making that much money as civil servants, they work very hard, and they work in more complexity than any of us will ever work in our working life. And yet they show up every day trying to wade through that complexity and do the right thing. That is really major. And I think that's what we expose students to.
I love that. I absolutely love that. I think it's amazing. Alison, thank you very much. I've really enjoyed this.
Thank you for having me. Me too.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Oxford Plus, presented by me, Susannah de Jager. If you want to stay up to date with all things Oxford Plus, please visit our website, oxfordplus.co.uk, and sign up for our newsletter so you never miss an update. Oxford Plus was made in partnership with Mishcon de Rare and is produced and edited by Story 94.